They forgot humanity was the apex, until the Hyper-Iron Dreadnoughts rose from the core of Sol. Chapter 1. The rain on Neo-London was acid, a fine shimmering drizzle that hissed against the reinforced plasteel of the observation deck. It wasn't the rain itself that bothered Commander Lyra Vashti, though. It was the silence. A silence so profound, so utterly lacking in the usual hum of the Council's ubiquitous surveillance drones, that it pressed against her skull with the weight of a collapsing star. Lyra was, by all accounts, a failure. A brilliant, obsessive, and utterly unnerving failure. At 32, she held the rank of Admiral, a position earned not through strategic brilliance or battlefield prowess, but through an almost unsettling competence in activating and maintaining the dormant systems embedded within the planet's core. Systems that hadn't been used in 300 millennia. Systems that, according to the Council's increasingly frantic projections, were now undeniably active. She stared out at the choked gray sprawl of the city, a tangle of vertical farms and repurposed skyscrapers, and felt a cold, primal recognition. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was a resonance. A deep-seated understanding of a language she hadn't consciously learned, a knowledge of geometry and force far beyond the current capabilities of the Grand Fleet. It was the Sovereign's wake. The briefing room hadn't been a briefing room a moment before. It had been a dimly lit chamber carved directly into the bedrock beneath the Royal Observatory, dominated by a pulsating obsidian console, the nexus that crackled with raw, untamed energy. Around her stood a collection of Council representatives, faces etched with a mixture of terror and bewildered admiration. There were seasoned generals, theoretical physicists, who dedicated their lives to understanding the universe, and a contingent of hastily assembled psychological stability teams, all utterly useless. Admiral Vashti, Director Thorne, a perpetually sweating man whose voice was habitually pitched a shade too high, began, his voice trembling slightly. The Riventave breached the shroud. The shroud. The Dyson sphere masking Earth, a testament to the Council's long-abandoned vanity and the desperate pragmatism of the First Epoch. A shimmering veil of manipulated space-time, designed to deter unwelcome attention. It had held for centuries, a symbol of humanity's careful self-imposed exile. Now, it was a punctured membrane. The Riven are not behaving as predicted, Dr. Chen, a theoretical physicist specializing in extra-dimensional threats, interrupted, his voice a strained whisper. Their entropy fields there, not merely consuming energy. They're consuming reality itself. The standard containment protocols are ineffective. Lyra ignored them. She wasn't interested in probabilities or theoretical models. She was listening to something else. Something deeper. The Nexus was responding to the Riven's approach, pulsing with a rhythm that mirrored a heartbeat. An ancient, predatory pulse. The activation sequence is complete, she announced, her voice calm, almost hypnotic. Initiate Protocol Obsidian, Echo Toto. The effect was instantaneous. The obsidian console flared with blinding white light, and a tremor ran through the city. Below, the ground shifted, cracking with the groaning of tectonic plates. Then, with a sound like the exhalation of a dying god, the earth rose. It wasn't a gradual ascent. It was a violent, terrifying eruption. From the heart of the planet, the solidified remains of Jupiter and Saturn's ancient cores emerged colossal structures of matte black armor, defying gravity and the very laws of physics. They were undeniably dreadnoughts, but unlike any the Council's historical databases had ever documented. Each vessel was at least 10 kilometers in diameter, a jagged, asymmetrical monstrosity bristling with weapons of unimaginable power. The UF Star Devourer, as they were now being designated, was the largest. Impossible. General Volkov, a man who'd commanded fleets in countless campaigns, choked out, his face pale. They're mirroring the designs of the First Epoch vessels, but scaled up, exponentially. Lyra didn't respond. She felt the power surging through her, a torrent of instinct and inherited knowledge. The dormant protocols of the Sovereign's sleep weren't simply activating, they were consuming her, reshaping her physiology. Her eyes began to glow with a faint, iridescent blue light, reflecting the energy emanating from the dreadnoughts. "The Riven are focused on the central energy nexus," she said, her voice now resonant with an ancient authority. "They're attempting to exploit the residual energy signature of the original Council's defenses. Redirecting." With a gesture, she brought up a holographic projection of the Sol system, overlaid with a network of complex energy streams. The Riven fleet, a swarm of amorphous, entropy-infused shadows, were converging on Earth, drawn towards a single point, the heart of the Dyson sphere. Deploying tactical forces, she commanded, and the impossible happened. From the ravaged remains of Neo-London, squads of heavily armored soldiers, clad in archaic, biomimetic armor, began to emerge. They moved with a speed and coordination that bordered on the supernatural, utilizing weapons that resembled nothing the Council had ever produced, weapons that channeled raw gravitational energy. Lyra watched, a grim satisfaction spreading across her face. The Apex had returned. And humanity, after 300 millennia of pretending not to remember, was ready to hunt again. "Tell them," she said, her voice carrying across the ravaged observation deck, to stand down. "We have a visitor to greet." Chapter 2. The Shadow of the Weaver. The air on the observation deck of the Argonaut, the Council's flagship, thrummed with an energy that was almost palpable. A low-frequency vibration resonating from the monstrous dreadnoughts circling the Sol system. Lyra, Admiral of the newly awakened fleet, remained a study in unsettling composure. The iridescent blue glow surrounding her eyes had intensified, swirling with intricate patterns that seemed to echo the impossible geometry of the phase iron hulls. The transformation wasn't merely physical, it was a rewriting of her very being, a brutal, beautiful process of reclaiming an identity lost for millennia. "The projections are stabilizing," a frantic voice crackled over the comms. It was Commander Gian, his face a mask of pale exertion as he wrestled with the chaotic data flowing from the sensor arrays. "The Riven are holding steady on the primary energy signature. Their attempts to breach the Dyson shield's residual harmonics are frustratingly resilient. They're adapting. And they're learning." Lyra didn't react. She wasn't processing data, she was feeling the Riven's approach. They were cold, utterly devoid of anything resembling understanding, like a glacier grinding against stone. But they were trying to understand. Their attempts to corrupt the ancient defenses were like insects frantically crawling over a piece of polished obsidian, relentlessly, futilely, chipping away. "Focus the neutron hammer's stasis fields," she commanded, her voice a low, resonant hum. "Increase the probability matrix by 30. We're not hunting them, Commander, we're preserving the opportunity." John hesitated. "Admiral, the energy expenditure, it's exceeding our projected calculations. Prolonged stasis fields are destabilizing the singularity itself. The risk of a contained collapse is significant." Lyra's gaze sharpened. "Risk is a variable we calculate with. Maintain the field. Let them become frozen monuments to their ambition." She gestured towards the holographic projection, now overlaid with a dynamic representation of the neutron hammer's field. It resembled a shimmering, violet bubble, compressing the Riven ships into an almost unbearable density, a beautiful, terrifying cage. Suddenly, a new visual materialized on the projection, a chillingly elegant distortion. One of the Riven, a vessel shaped like a dissolving spiral of darkness, had begun to weave. It wasn't attacking it, wasn't trying to breach the shield. Instead, it was subtly altering the holographic projection itself. The energy streams, the projected location of the Dyson sphere's core, even the shapes of the dreadnoughts, they were being subtly manipulated, like a river redirected by a phantom hand. "What is happening?" Gian shrieked, his fingers dancing across the console. "The Riven are actively disrupting our sensor readings." Their causality fields are integrated with our reality. Lyra's eyes widened, recognizing the threat instantly. They're not simply observing, she murmured, the ancient protocols within her surging to the forefront. They're attempting to become part of the system, to unravel our perception of reality. She barked out a new order. Activate the phase shift matrices on the Argonaut and the Leviathan. Initiate localized space-time distortions. We're going to meet them on their terms. The Argonaut shuddered violently as the phase shift matrices engaged. The observation deck dissolved into a kaleidoscopic blur of impossible colors and geometries. The crew, those few council members who hadn't succumbed to a near catatonic state of terror, braced themselves as the ship momentarily ceased to exist, then reappeared a few meters away, oriented at a completely different angle. Emerging from the distortion, the Argonaut found itself directly in the path of the weaving riven vessel. It wasn't engaging in combat. It was consuming space around the dreadnought. The dark vessel seemed to unravel the very fabric of reality, dissolving the surrounding space into a viscous, swirling void. "It's feeding on the distortions," a young science officer, Elias, yelled, his voice laced with horrified fascination. "The phase iron is amplifying its effects. It's creating a miniature singularity, a localized pocket of unmade reality." Lyra moved with a terrifying grace. She raised her hand, and a weapon materialized from the void, a hand cannon crafted from solidified temporal energy. It wasn't a weapon of brute force, it was a weapon of precision, a channel for raw causality. "Target the Weaver," she commanded, her voice a command that vibrated with the authority of a forgotten god. "Disrupt its causal flow." As the hand cannon fired, a beam of pure temporal energy lanced out, striking the riven vessel with pinpoint accuracy. The effect wasn't instantaneous destruction. Instead, the energy beam seemed to snag on the Weaver's being, momentarily freezing it in a state of cascading paradox. The spiral of darkness flickered, fractured, and then, for a brief, agonizing second, became a perfect, gleaming replica of the Argonaut. The Weaver recoiled, momentarily stunned. Lyra seized the opportunity. "Now!" she roared, and the dreadnoughts around her unleashed a coordinated barrage of gravitational weaponry. The attack wasn't designed to kill, it was designed to redirect. Massive waves of altered gravity slammed into the Weaver, twisting its causality fields, forcing it to abandon its weaving and retreat into the swirling darkness. As the Weaver vanished, Lyra stared at the holographic projection, a grim smile playing on her lips. "They're learning," she said, her voice laced with an ancient satisfaction. "That's why we hunt." Chapter 3. The Geometry of Annihilation. The silence after the Weaver's retreat was not peaceful, but intensely calculated. The human dreadnoughts, behemoths of phased iron and temporal energy, pulsed with an almost palpable hostility. Admiral Lyra, a woman sculpted from cold efficiency and ancient lineage, oversaw the reconfiguration of Earth's defenses. The multi-layered Dysonian shield remained, a shimmering, impenetrable bubble. But now it was layered with a new, terrifying reality, the raw potential of the Sovereign's sleep. "Analysis, please," Lyra commanded, her voice echoing through the bridge of the Argonaut, the flagship. The holographic projection of the Weaver's last moments shifted, cycling through the agonizing replays of its temporal disruption. Data streams, mostly incomprehensible to the Council's analysts, flooded the screen's projections of warped spacetime, calculated probabilities of causal collapse, and minute fluctuations in the very fabric of reality. "The Riven's signature is evolving, Admiral," reported Dr. Gian, the Council's foremost expert in exotic physics, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's adapting." The initial disruption was purely reactive, a primal fear of being unmade. Now, it's exhibiting a rudimentary understanding of our defenses. It's attempting to anticipate the flow of causality. "Impressive," Lyra said, a sliver of something akin to amusement in her voice. "But it's still operating on instinct. We can exploit that. She gestured towards a console displaying a complex schematic, a representation of the Riven's core structure, overlaid with intricate geometric patterns. The Weaver's primary function is to create and maintain causality chains. We're going to unravel them. We're going to introduce geometries that shouldn't exist. The next volley was different. It wasn't the chaotic barrage of gravitational weaponry. Instead, the dreadnoughts unleashed a series of precisely targeted phase spikes, miniature singularities, meticulously calibrated to disrupt the Weaver's temporal distortions. These weren't weapons of raw destruction, they were instruments of ontological torture. Each spike wasn't a burst of energy, it was a localized collapse of space-time, a tiny contained void that threatened to overwrite the Weaver's existence with raw, unformed potential. "The fluctuations are spiking, Admiral," warned Commander Reese, his voice tight with apprehension. "The phase spikes are inducing cascading paradoxes within the Weaver's core. It's beginning to fracture." The holographic Weaver shimmered violently, its swirling darkness twisting into a kaleidoscope of impossible shapes. The replicated Argonaut within its core flickered, its detailed contours dissolving and reforming in a horrifying, accelerating dance. The Riven, for the first time, wasn't simply reacting, it was fighting back, attempting to maintain its fractured reality. "Increase the spike density," Lyra ordered, her face impassive. "We're pushing its limits. We need to force it into a state of complete ontological dissolution." As the spike density increased, the Weaver emitted a high-pitched, dissonant wail, a sound that felt less like audio and more like a violation of the mind. The battle wasn't fought with lasers or missiles, but with the fundamental laws of existence. It was a cold, mathematical war, a contest of geometries. Suddenly, a holographic projection flared a close-up image of the Weaver's essence, now reduced to a chaotic, swirling vortex. Within the vortex, a new element appeared, a complex, three-dimensional structure, a fractal representation of the Argonaut's design, constructed entirely of solidified temporal energy. "What is it doing?" Jian yelled, frantically manipulating the controls. "It's constructing a temporal echo. It's creating a copy of itself." "Impossible," Reese stammered. "The Weaver's structure is inherently unstable. A temporal echo would violate its very nature." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "It's learned, all right. It's learning our tactics. But it's still making a fundamental mistake." She raised her hand, and the Argonaut's temporal energy cannons unleashed a concentrated beam, not at the Weaver, but at the nascent temporal echo. This wasn't a disruption, it was a rewrite. The beam didn't simply shatter the echo, it flooded it with a precisely calibrated stream of information, the entirety of the Argonaut's operational history, its combat strategies, its tactical protocols. The echo, now saturated with this knowledge, began to unravel, collapsing in on itself with an almost violent elegance. "It's overloaded," Jian exclaimed, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and terror. "The Weaver is drowning in its own replicated history. It's experiencing a complete temporal feedback loop." The Weaver's final cry was a strangled shriek of paradox, followed by a complete cessation of activity. The remaining Riven ships, sensing the overwhelming power of the human response, began a chaotic retreat, scattering across the ravaged core of Sol. Lyra watched the last of the Riven disappear, a serene expression on her face. "They've been defeated," she said quietly. "But the victory is only temporary. Their capacity for adaptation is alarming. We must remain vigilant. We must continue to teach them the geometry of annihilation." She turned to face her crew, her eyes radiating an ancient, unwavering authority. "The hunt begins anew." Chapter 4. The Geometry of Annihilation. The immediate aftermath of the Weaver's collapse was a ballet of frantic calculations and desperate repairs. The Argonaut, battered but stubbornly operational, was swarmed by the digitized echoes of its past simulations of every possible engagement. Every tactical permutation played out in real time. It was a messy, overwhelming process, like trying to untangle a galaxy of knots with a single thread. Lyra, however, remained unperturbed, her presence a calming counterpoint to the controlled chaos. She observed the engineers, the tactical analysts, and the weapons specialists with an unsettlingly detached eye, as if watching a particularly elaborate, self-destructive experiment. "The Riven aren't simply fighting us," she stated, her voice clipped and precise. "They are studying us. They're attempting to understand the fundamental logic behind our tactics, the ingrained patterns of our aggression." It's disconcerting. Jian, his brow slick with sweat despite the climate control, offered a hesitant assessment. "Their entropy fields are exhibiting a measurable shift. They're attempting to mimic the phase-iron distortion of our hulls, but they can't replicate the underlying quantum resonance. It's like trying to copy a fractal. The more you zoom in, the more intricate and impossible it becomes." "Exactly," Lyra confirmed, a flicker of something akin to grim satisfaction in her eyes. "They're not striving for brute force. They're pursuing a higher-order strategy, one rooted in disruption and analysis." The silence was broken by a jarring alarm, a cascade of red lights flashing across the Argonauts' bridge. Commander Reese, a young, sharply intelligent officer, reported in a clipped urgency. "Admiral, we're detecting a localized distortion field approximately 500 kilometers out. Energy signature is consistent with a mass warp drive, but it's fragmented. Unstable." The source of the distortion appeared on the main view screen, a shimmering, iridescent scar on the surface of the asteroid belt surrounding Saturn. Emerging from the chaos was a smaller dreadnought, a variation on the abyssal maw, this one shaped like a colossal, fractured claw. It was aggressively unstable, its phase-iron plating flickering with visible energy signatures, and its weapons systems pulsed with a chaotic, randomized energy output. "They've learned to adapt," Lyra said, her voice devoid of emotion. "They've accelerated their learning curve. The Riven aren't just studying our tactics, they're actively attempting to copy them, but with a corrupted, fractured understanding. It's like they're feeding off the echoes of our battles," Jian theorized, his face pale. "The temporal feedback loop has created a splintered version of our combat history, and they're consuming it." Lyra nodded. "Precisely. And they're evolving. The Argonauts' temporal cannons were effective against a single echo. But this is a storm of echoes. We can't simply overload it with data, we need to control the flow." She issued a series of rapid commands, diverting power to the Argonauts' temporal disruptors and shifting the focus of the temporal beam. This time, however, the beam wasn't directed at a single echo. Instead, it was aimed at the nascent dreadnought, flooding it with a stream of information, not the Argonauts' history, but a carefully curated composite of historical combat strategies from across the human galaxy, spanning the First Epoch and the millennia of dormancy. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The fractured dreadnought convulsed, its weapons systems cycling through a bewildering array of attack patterns, from ancient plasma bolts to kinetic railguns. The chaos intensified, threatening to overwhelm the ship systems. It's becoming a paradox," a young analyst shouted, frantically adjusting the temporal settings. "The information is creating internal contradictions within its core programming." Suddenly, the dreadnought's weapons system sputtered and died. Its movements became jerky and erratic, like a machine struggling to reconcile conflicting instructions. Then, with a final, shuddering groan, it ceased all activity, collapsing into a shimmering, unstable residue. "They're susceptible to cognitive dissonance," Lyra stated, her voice laced with a chilling certainty. "We've weaponized their own confusion against them. The geometry of annihilation, in its purest form." As the Argonauts stabilized, Lyra turned to face her crew. "The Riven will continue to adapt, to learn. Their capacity for change is frightening. But we understand their motivation. a desperate, primal urge to understand, to impose order on the chaos. And we understand the only way to combat that urge. She raised her hand, and the Argonaut's main cannons roared to life, unleashing a precisely aimed barrage of temporal disruption pulses. Let them drown in their own reflections. Let them learn that the apex predator doesn't merely fight, it destroys the very notion of fighting. The hunt, it seemed, was only going to get more intricate, more terrifyingly human. Chapter 5. The Echo of Oblivion. The silence after the temporal barrage was almost more unsettling than the chaos. The Riven fleet, what remained of it after the initial, devastating assault, drifted in a stunned, iridescent haze. The entropy beams that had once ripped through reality now stuttered, like a broken recording, reflecting the disrupted temporal field back upon themselves. The Riven ships weren't dissolving, they were fragmenting. Not into particles, but into echoes. Admiral Valerius, her eyes burning with the cold, calculating brilliance of a resurrected predator, observed the spectacle from the bridge of the Argonaut. The Dreadnought systems were running on emergency power, a skeletal framework of optimized targeting algorithms and predictive combat models. It was a far cry from the roaring, kinetic leviathan it had been moments before, but it was functional. "Analysis, Dr. Sharma," Valerius commanded, her voice a low, measured cadence. "What's the cumulative effect of these temporal disruptions? Are we degrading their core processing matrix?" "Dr. Sharma," a pale, almost skeletal figure hunched over the main console, responded with a hesitant tremor. "Potentially, Admiral. The scans are chaotic. The Riven's temporal signatures are destabilizing, fracturing along multiple timelines. We're seeing iterations of their ships facing in and out of existence, battling with different configurations of weaponry, different tactical assessments. It's recursive oblivion." Lyra, ever the pragmatist, cut in, essentially. "We're forcing them to experience their own destruction before it happens." The UF Star Devourer, a towering obsidian monument orbiting Earth, remained impassive, its gravity well a silent promise of imminent devastation. From within, the ancient human systems, the predictive analytics, the combat simulations were churning, feeding information directly into the Dreadnought's core. It wasn't just fighting, it was learning how to break the Riven, each iteration refined by the echoes of its previous failures. "The Abyssal Maw is attempting a localized temporal distortion," Lieutenant Kalen reported. His voice strained. "It's generating a miniature stasis field around a group of Riven scout ships. But it's pulling in echoes of itself too. Multiple instances of the Maw are appearing, overlapping, collapsing in on themselves." Valerius nodded grimly. "The Riven are becoming trapped in their own attempts to understand us. It's a fatal flaw. Their arrogance, their desperate need to impose a linear framework on the universe, is their undoing." Suddenly, a piercing alarm blared throughout the Argonaut. "Incoming projectile!" shouted Ensign Petrov, his face illuminated by the flashing console displays. "Designated target the neutron hammer." The neutron hammer, a behemoth of rotating neutronium blades and contained singularity weaponry, was unleashing a focused burst of stasis singularity. But instead of impacting the Riven ship, the beam splintered, multiplied, and began to actively target the neutron hammer itself. "It's feeding on our disruption pulses," Sharma shouted, frantically adjusting the shields. "The singularity is amplifying the temporal distortions, creating a feedback loop. It's trying to freeze us." Valerius barked out orders. "Override the hammer's targeting protocols. Divert all available power to the phase iron emitters. Initiate the entropy cage sequence." As the neutron hammer spun wildly, struggling against the chaotic temporal forces, the Argonaut unleashed a concentrated barrage of phase iron energy. The effect was immediate. The hammer's weapons systems sputtered and died, not from damage, but from a fundamental unraveling of its existence. The rotating blades ceased spinning, the singularity collapsed, and the neutron hammer began to shimmer, its form flickering like a holographic projection. "It's being erased," Lyra whispered, a strange mixture of triumph and pity in her voice. "Not destroyed, but rendered non-existent within the temporal stream." The Riven, witnessing this, reacted with a desperate, almost panicked intensity. They unleashed a massive volley of entropy beams, not at the Argonaut, but at the Star Devourer. The beams impacted the Dreadnought's hull, and for a moment, a horrifying visual appeared on the bridge monitors, a miniature version of the Star Devourer, frozen in time, surrounded by a swirling vortex of temporal energy. "They're trying to trap us in a temporal loop," Kaelan yelled. "The gravity well is destabilizing. The hull is fracturing across multiple timelines." Valerius remained unmoved. "Activate Chronal Anchor Protocol. Engage the temporal stasis field. And out. We will not be a plaything for their existential dread." As the Argonaut established a localized stasis field, trapping itself within the growing temporal distortion around the Star Devourer, the Riven unleashed a final desperate attack, a wave of pure entropy directed at the human fleet. But it was too late. The humans, operating on instincts honed over millennia, had anticipated this, pre-programmed the dreadnoughts with algorithms designed to absorb and refract such attacks. The entropy wave crashed against the human hulls, and instead of dissipating, it was channeled, amplified, and redirected back upon the Riven. The Riven ships, already fractured and unstable, imploded in miniature temporal supernovae, their existence erased from the timeline, devoured by the echoes of their own desperate attempts to understand the apex predator. Valerius observed the final dissolution of the Riven threat with a chilling detachment. "The silence returns," she said, her voice echoing across the bridge. "But this time, we've learned a valuable lesson. They thought to destroy us. They forgot the most primal of truths we are not designed to be understood. We are designed to extinguish." Chapter 6. Echoes of the Scythe. The silence returned, but it was a tighter, more menacing silence than before. The Argonaut, still cocooned within its temporal stasis field, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a particularly ornate coffin. Outside, the colossal presence of the Star Devourer, the abyssal maw, and the neutron hammer dominated the system, a stark and terrifying testament to the resurrected might of the Sovereign's sleep. Valerius, her face etched with a strange mix of exhaustion and grim satisfaction, was reviewing tactical schematics projected onto the bridge's crystalline surface. The holographic displays pulsed with data streams, energy signatures, gravitational distortions, and the unsettling visual echoes of the Riven's demise. "The residual temporal bleed is minimal," she announced, her voice clipped and devoid of emotion. "The temporal anchors held. But the Riven's attack it left a significant imprint. We've detected traces of entangled entropy signatures woven into the very fabric of the Star Devourer's structure. In other words, they tried to rewrite us," Kaelan muttered, still visibly shaken from the near catastrophe. "To inject themselves into our programming, to corrupt our instinct." "Precisely," Valerius confirmed. "A primitive attempt at understanding. A fatal mistake. The Sovereign's wake isn't just a genetic, encoding it's a layered defense against precisely this kind of manipulation." Suddenly, a piercing alarm blared through the bridge. Lieutenant Reese, his face slick with sweat, burst onto the scene, clutching a data slate. "Admiral, we're detecting a localized distortion emanating from the neutron hammer. It's fluctuating wildly, almost like it's trying to remember something." Valerius' expression tightened. "Analyze the energy signature. Is it similar to what we detected during the initial Riven attack?" The holographic displays shifted, highlighting the neutron hammer's core. The stasis field, a shimmering bubble of compressed spacetime around the weapon, was visibly fracturing, rippling with chaotic energy. A cold, precise voice, translated from the Dreadnought's internal network, confirmed their fears. Signature matches initial Riven entropy wave, but amplified, modulated its attempting to initiate a localized temporal stasis field, targeting Earth. "They're trying to trap us," Kalen whispered, his voice laced with horror. "They're recreating the Sovereign's sleep, but this time, they're weaponizing it." Valerius didn't respond immediately. She remained motionless, her eyes locked onto the chaotic energy swirling around the neutron hammer. Then, a slow, deliberate smile spread across her face, a chilling display of ancient power. "Interesting. They've become rather inventive." She barked an order. "Red alert. Divert all available power to the phase iron dampeners. Initiate Echo Scythe protocol." The Argonaut shuddered as energy surged through its systems. The temporal stasis field intensified, effectively shielding the ship from the neutron hammer's attempt to freeze it. Simultaneously, the Star Devourer, guided by Valerius' command, unleashed a concentrated wave of gravitational distortion, not a direct attack, but a carefully calibrated echo of the initial riven energy. The effect was immediate and devastating. The neutron hammer's chaotic temporal fluctuations abruptly ceased. The shimmering stasis field collapsed inward, not on the Argonaut, but on the hammer itself. A miniature, localized black hole, a swirling vortex of compressed spacetime, materialized within the weapon's core, devouring the distorted energy, and with it, the hammer's intricate temporal control. The remnants of the weapon, reduced to a smoldering husk, drifted harmlessly away. "They underestimated the principle of reflection," Valerius stated, her voice laced with a chillingly pragmatic observation. "We didn't simply absorb their attack. We turned it against them, leveraging their own desperate attempt at understanding." As the dust settled, Reese reported, "Admiral, we've identified the source of the distortion. The neutron hammer's core is experiencing a recursive loop. It's attempting to generate a second stasis field, targeting us." Valerius' smile widened. "Let them try. We've already anticipated their design. The Abyssal Maw has been instructed to introduce a counter-resonance, a controlled cascade of negative entropy. It will disrupt the hammer's attempt, creating a feedback loop that will ultimately consume its core." From the fringes of the system, the Abyssal Maw opened its maw, emitting a wave of shimmering darkness that collided with the weakening temporal distortion surrounding the neutron hammer. The effect was spectacular, a visual representation of entropy itself, consuming the weapon's energy and collapsing its structure. The neutron hammer vanished without a trace, leaving only a lingering sense of profound, unsettling silence. "The Apex has returned, and it remembers how to kill," Valerius said, her gaze sweeping across the assembled crew. "What do you? And we remember how to make it forget." She paused, her eyes gleaming with an ancient, predatory light. "Now, let us see if the Council can learn the distinction." Chapter 7. The Echo of Consumption. The victory over the neutron hammer was a brutal, almost beautiful demonstration of the Sovereign's might. The Council, huddled in their fortified command centers across the Sol system, watched the spectacle on holographic projections, a horrifying ballet of temporal distortion and controlled annihilation. The initial shock had given way to a chilling realization they weren't fighting an enemy, they were being corrected. "Analysis confirms," Reese reported, his voice clipped and devoid of emotion. "The Abyssal Maw's counter-resonance was not merely a disruption. It instigated a complete restructuring of the neutron hammer's quantum architecture. It identified and exploited its primary design flaw, the inherent instability of attempting to manipulate localized temporal fields on a scale so vast." Valerius nodded, a flicker of satisfaction in her deep-set eyes. "Precisely. Their arrogance blinded them. They believed a weapon designed to bind the gods could be replicated by a civilization obsessed with theoretical physics. They forgot the fundamental principle: brute force, applied with absolute conviction, is often the most elegant solution." The silence that followed was broken only by the rhythmic hum of the Dreadnought's quantum engines. The 10-kilometer hulls, now radiating a low-level gravitational distortion, formed a protective cage around Earth, an almost tangible assertion of humanity's return to dominance. "Admiral, Commander Lyra. A young, sharp-witted officer, recently transferred from the core world, spoke up, her voice tight with controlled urgency. The Riven have adapted. They've begun deploying smaller, more agile vessels, what we're calling Spectres, to harass the Dreadnoughts. They seem to be immune to the mass warp drive's initial impact. Valerius considered this, her gaze fixed on the holographic projection of a Spectre, a shimmering, vaguely humanoid form that seemed to phase in and out of existence, spitting out streams of pure entropy. Interesting. Their tactical shift suggests an understanding of our core weapon. They've learned to avoid the blunt force. We need to find a way to counter their fluidity. We've detected a concentrated energy signature emanating from the Spectre fleet, Reese announced. A rhythmic pulse mirroring the oscillations of the neutron hammer's stasis singularity. A resonant frequency designed to destabilize the phase iron hull, the key to our resilience. A cold, calculating smile spread across Valerius' face. So, they've discovered the echo of consumption. The Sovereign's sleep wasn't just a narrative, it was an active defense. We simply deactivated it. It's time to remind them. She turned to a holographic display showing a schematic of the Star Devourer, her fingers tracing the intricate pathways of its power core. The Star Devourer is equipped with a modified resonance amplifier Project Nightingale. It's calibrated to precisely mimic the Spectre's frequency. But instead of destabilizing the hull, we'll use it to induce a controlled temporal fracturing within their ranks. A localized chronal storm. Essentially, Lyra asked, her brow furrowed. That's incredibly risky. Even a minor fluctuation could at will, Valerius finished, her voice unwavering, be contained. Webb factored in potential temporal bleed-through. However, the Riven are reliant on a linear perception of time. Disrupting their ability to coordinate to react will be devastating. As the Star Devourer activated Project Nightingale, a ripple of distorted reality spread outwards from its core. The holographic projection of the Spectre fleet shimmered violently, their movements becoming erratic, disjointed. The spectral forms flickered and fragmented, their entropy beams sputtering and dying. The effect is profound, Reese observed, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Their cohesion is dissolving. They're experiencing time in a way we haven't encountered before. It's like watching a shattered reflection, fighting against its source. Suddenly, the comms crackled with a panicked voice. Admiral! Multiple Spectre vessels are attempting to bypass the Star Devourer's shield. They're utilizing micro-wormholes, creating localized distortions, to phase through the gravitational field. Valerius remained impassive, her eyes fixed on the chaotic display. Then let them phase. The mass warp drive will compensate. This isn't a battle of defense, it's a demonstration of scale. We aren't just fighting, we're showing them the consequence of thinking they could outsmart a civilization that once consumed stars. A holographic image of a single Spectre appeared directly before her. It wasn't attacking. Instead, it seemed to be observing, studying. A faint, almost imperceptible signal emanated from the creature, a complex pattern of quantum entanglement. Valerius smiled. A genuine, chilling smile this time. The Apex has returned, and it has begun to learn. She turned to the assembled crew, her voice laced with a quiet, terrifying authority. Prepare yourselves. They're sending us a message, and I suspect it won't be one of surrender. Chapter 8. The Echo of Consumption. The air in the bridge of the Leviathan, the flagship of the Sovereign's Legion, thrummed with a low, resonant frequency. The holographic projection of the Riven Vanguard, once a swirling chaos of entropy and shadow, now resembled a shattered obsidian mosaic. It was no longer actively attacking, but a morbidly fascinated audience to the Leviathan's brutal demonstration of power. Analysis? Valerius' voice, amplified by the bridge's internal comms, cut through the tense silence. The micro-wormhole attempts have ceased, Admiral, reported Lieutenant Commander Jayan, his fingers flying across the console. They're not attempting to bypass the shield directly. Instead, they're focusing on the residual distortion field generated by the mass warp drive. They're mimicking it. Mimicking? Reese, the team's xenolinguist and theoretical physicist, frowned, pulling up a holographic waveform displaying the Riven's attempted phasing patterns. It's not random. The complexity is deliberate. It's as if they're trying to understand the underlying mechanics of our technology, not just brute force against it. Suddenly, the comms erupted with a new chilling sound, a high-pitched, almost subsonic drone that vibrated deep within the bones. The holographic projection of the Riven entity, the one initially observing, began to shift. It wasn't disintegration, not exactly. It was a folding in of reality, a localized distortion that fractured the projected image into a dozen shimmering, impossible angles. Shields at maximum. Valerius barked, her hand slamming down on the command console. Red alert. Initiate phase-iron resonance amplification. The Leviathan shuddered as the phase-iron plating around her resonated, generating a field of oscillating quantum interference. The drone intensified, and the Riven entity's projection began to unravel with increasing speed. But instead of being consumed, the fragmentation seemed to feed it. They're not resisting the phase-iron, Giant shouted, his voice strained. They're absorbing it. Every pulse, every fluctuation, is strengthening their coherence, refining their ability to phase. Valeria's smile tightened, a sliver of predatory satisfaction in her eyes. Intriguing. It appears our initial strategy was simplistic. She turned to her second-in-command, Captain Alistair Thorne, a grizzled veteran of countless battles against everything from rogue AI to temporal anomalies. Thorne, deploy the Echo nullifiers. Set them to maximum range. We're going to silence the signal. The Echo nullifiers were a devastating piece of technology, developed during the Sovereign's sleep, a localized field designed to disrupt and nullify complex, patterned energy signatures. They didn't destroy, they disassembled, rendering coherent signals into a chaotic static. But as the nullifiers activated, spreading across the Sol system's orbital grid, they met with unexpected resistance. Nullifiers are experiencing feedback loops, Admiral, Lieutenant Kaya reported, her face pale. The Riven aren't just absorbing the energy. They're redirecting it. The echoes are being amplified, returning with exponentially greater force. The Riven entity's projection stabilized, resolving into a single, terrifyingly precise image of vast multifaceted eye, radiating a cold, absolute intelligence. It wasn't hostile, not overtly. It simply knew. It knew about the Sovereign's sleep, about the deliberate degradation of humanity, about the star devourers slumbering within Jupiter and Saturn. They're communicating, Reese whispered, his voice choked with awe and horror. Not through words, but through concepts. Pure distilled understanding of our history, of our intent. It's overwhelming. Valeria stepped forward, her eyes locked on the holographic projection. Tell me, she said, her voice low and deliberately measured. Why did you choose to devour half the galaxy? Why did you unleash the Riven? The eye blinked. A single, shimmering strand of energy extended from it, flowing directly into Valeria's neural implant. A torrent of information flooded her mind, visions of civilizations rising and falling, of stars being extinguished, of the universe itself decaying under the inexorable pressure of entropy. The Riven weren't simply consumers, they were agents of the universe's inevitable demise, tirelessly pruning the weak and wasteful. They hadn't chosen this path, they were this path. Valeria staggered, clutching her head. When she regained her composure, her expression was utterly changed. The youthful, confident authority was gone, replaced by an ancient, unbearable weariness. They are not a threat to be defeated, she said, her voice a guttural rasp. They are a consequence. We were a mistake. Before anyone could react, the Leviathan's main weapon systems activated, unleashing a concentrated beam of condensed singularity energy directly at the Riven entity. It was a targeted attack, not designed for destruction but for observation. "Deploy the mass warp drive," Valerius commanded, her voice devoid of emotion. "Let them witness the apex return." The Leviathan surged forward, a monstrous silhouette against the backdrop of the dying galaxy, and began its descent into the heart of the Riven's attack. The hunt, it seemed, had truly begun. Chapter 9. Echoes of the Devourer. The descent of the Leviathan into the Riven's core was a ballet of terrifying precision. Valerius, now utterly consumed by the echoes of her ancestors, moved with a calculated ruthlessness that bordered on clinical detachment. The holographic displays in the bridge of the Leviathan, a swirling vortex of data representing the Riven's composition, energy signatures, and dimensional distortions, were treated not as tactical information, but as an examination of a particularly grotesque specimen. Adjusting warp drive parameters, Lieutenant Commander Rise reported, his voice strained. "Gravitational stresses are approaching critical levels. The phase shift is unstable." "Maintain it," Valerius ordered, her gaze fixed on the central projection. "We are not seeking annihilation. We are seeking understanding. Let them perceive the efficiency of design." The Leviathan's hull groaned under the strain of manipulating the fabric of space-time. The ship, a monument to a forgotten age, was straining to contain the sheer chaotic energy of the Riven. The matte black armor pulsed with an internal light, reflecting the fractured geometry of the surrounding reality. It wasn't merely a weapon, it was a testament to a brutal, elegant logic, the logic of the apex predator. Suddenly, a wave of raw entropy washed over the bridge. The holographic displays flickered violently, and a cacophony of whispers, not of words, but of potential futures, collapsing assaulted Valerius' mind. She didn't recoil. Instead, she anticipated it, adjusting the Leviathan's phase shift matrix with a subtle, almost imperceptible movement. "The Riven are attempting to interpret our intentions," she stated, her voice low and resonant. "They see us as an anomaly, a deviation from the natural order. They are attempting to understand why we choose to observe rather than destroy." "Captain, they're projecting emotions," reported Ensign Sharma, her fingers flying across her console. "Fear, disgust, a primal sense of violation. They believe we are an affront to their purpose." Valerius nodded slowly. "That is precisely what we intend." As the Leviathan drew closer to the heart of the Riven entity, a pulsating, iridescent core that resembled a dying nebula, the effects intensified. The ship's systems began to degrade, its internal architecture momentarily unraveling as the Riven's reality-warping influence exerted its force. "Shield integrity at 68%. Reyes shouted, his face pale. "We're losing containment. The singularity drive is feeding back." "Override," Valerius commanded, her hand moving with an almost instinctive speed. "Focus the mass warp drive on the central nexus. Let them feel the weight of a dying star." The Leviathan unleashed a devastating wave of concentrated singularity energy. The core of the Riven entity, already teetering on the edge of collapse, flared with unimaginable intensity. The effect wasn't to destroy, but to recalibrate. The Riven's entropy beam, instead of obliterating the Leviathan, was absorbed, analyzed, and then subtly altered, its destructive potential redirected towards a single terrifying goal. The visual projections shifted, revealing not destruction, but an intricate, three-dimensional reconstruction of the Leviathan, its armor plating, its engines, even the individual atoms composing its hull rendered in pure, agonizing detail. The Riven's influence was not an attack, but a surgical inspection. "They are cataloging us," Sharma whispered, her voice choked with horror. "They are learning from us. They are adapting." A chilling realization dawned upon Valerius. They hadn't simply awakened the ancient human predators, they had inadvertently become a living, breathing data point in the Riven's grand, horrifying algorithm. "Increase the targeting parameters on the mass warp drive," she ordered, her voice regaining a sliver of its former authority. "We will show them the culmination of our design. We will demonstrate what it means to be the apex." The Leviathan surged forward, accelerating to near light speed. The final projection flickered into existence, a shimmering, impossible image of the UF Star Devourer, a fully operational and vastly upgraded version of the original. It was a weapon built not for defense, but for absolute ruthless dominance. "Deploy," Valerius commanded. "Let the echo of the Devourer resonate through the core of the Riven." As the Star Devourer launched its attack, a precise, devastating blast of singularity energy focused on the Riven's most vulnerable point, the Riven entity let out a silent, chilling shriek. It didn't fight back with force, it dissolved. Not exploded, not disintegrated, but simply ceased to be. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the strained hum of the Leviathan systems. Valerius stood motionless, her eyes closed, listening to the echoes of the First Epoch. "We have proven our superiority," she said, her voice filled with a chilling serenity. "Now, let the hunt truly begin." Chapter 10. The Scars of Creation. The victory over the Riven was swift, brutal, and utterly devoid of sentiment. The shimmer of the augmented Star Devourer's attack hadn't been a desperate plea, but a calculated statement of intent. The Riven, a chaotic, adaptive intelligence built on entropy and annihilation, hadn't possessed a concept of vulnerability beyond the purely theoretical until it encountered a weapon designed not to destroy, but to fundamentally alter existence. The Singularity Blast, perfectly tuned to the Riven's core structure, hadn't shattered it, it had rewritten it, converting its complex, self-organizing network into a cascade of meaningless data. The silence that followed was heavier than the lead shielding of the Leviathan. It wasn't the relieved quiet of a battle won, but the stark, unsettling quiet of a predator finally claiming its territory. "Sensor sweeps are returning anomalous readings," Lieutenant Commander Silas reported, his voice tight with controlled apprehension. "Multiple Riven fragments, scattered across a 5-light-year radius. But they're corrupted. Their energy signatures are fluctuating wildly, exhibiting properties we haven't observed before. It's as if they're trying to understand what happened." Valerius didn't respond immediately. She remained on the bridge, a solitary figure bathed in the pulsating glow of the holographic displays, her hand resting lightly on the control console. The ancient DNA, the Sovereign's wake, seemed to be subtly reshaping her perception, sharpening her instincts, solidifying the forgotten patterns of her ancestry. The galaxy felt different, sharper, more resonant with potential. "Analyze the corrupted fragments," she finally commanded, her voice carrying a tone that brooked no argument. "Prioritize the patterns. Determine what they're attempting to mimic. And for God's sake, find out why they're struggling." The analysis came back within minutes. Dr. John, the chief xenoarchaeologist, appeared on the main view screen, his face etched with a mixture of fascination and horror. "Admiral, the Riven fragments aren't simply malfunctioning. They're attempting to replicate the Star Devourer's attack. They're constructing miniature singularity projectors, trying to generate a focused blast of energy. But their understanding is incomplete. They're creating localized distortions, unstable pockets of reality. It's as if they're trying to learn how to erase." A grim understanding settled over the bridge. The Riven hadn't been defeated, it had been studied. And now, the study was underway, driven by a force far more terrifying than raw destruction. "Increase the defensive perimeter around Earth," Valerius ordered. "Deploy the phase shields. We don't want to provide a lesson for these mimics." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembled crew, a mixture of hardened veteran officers and young, eager recruits, all of them utterly dwarfed by the sheer scale of the dreadnoughts around them. "Let this serve as a reminder," she said, her voice low and resonant, "that our weapons are not just tools for annihilation. They are instruments of control, instruments of design. We will not simply fight. We will shape the chaos. Suddenly, a klaxon blared, shattering the tense silence. Multiple contacts, bearing 347 Mark 8. Incoming! Lieutenant Ramirez shouted, his face illuminated by the flashing red alerts. They're small, fast bioforms, Admiral. Hundreds of them. The view screen shifted to display a swarm of iridescent, insectile drones, each approximately 1 meter in size, buzzing with an unnerving, almost organic energy. These were not Riven constructs, but something entirely new. They moved with unsettling precision, exhibiting a level of coordinated aggression that hinted at a complex, emergent intelligence. Analysis? Valerius demanded. Origin unknown, Jine replied, his voice strained. They're utilizing a localized distortion field, a miniature entropy beam, similar to the Rivens but far more refined. They're targeting the Dreadnought's phase armor. It's working. The phase armor, the fundamental shield that had saved humanity for 3 centuries, was buckling under the relentless assault. The drones were eroding its structure, creating microscopic tears in the fabric of reality. Valerius didn't flinch. A slow, almost predatory smile spread across her face. Activate the Echo Protocol, she commanded. Let's see if our enemies understand the definition of dominance. As the Leviathan shifted into a silent, lethal ballet, the Dreadnought's internal systems initiated a sequence that hadn't been used since the First Epoch. The vessel began to subtly alter its dimensional resonance, mimicking the signature of the Star Devourer's attack. A cascade of precisely calibrated singularity bursts erupted from the Dreadnought's core, amplified through a network of hidden projectors. This time, however, there was no attempt at destruction. The echoes weren't aimed at the enemy, they were aimed within. The drones, caught in the relentless torrent of warped reality, began to unravel. Not exploded, not disintegrated, but deconstructed. Their bodies dissolved into shimmering, iridescent particles. Their intelligence erased, their very existence rendered meaningless. Valerius watched the carnage unfold on the view screen, her eyes cold and devoid of emotion. "The hunt has begun," she said, her voice a chilling whisper. "And we are the apex predators." Chapter 11. The Geometry of Oblivion. The silence following the Echo Protocol was deeper than the one that had preceded it, a silence not of emptiness, but of unsettling geometry. The Riven Vanguard, previously a swirling chaos of decay, was now contained. Scattered across a radius of approximately 50 kilometers around the Leviathan, they weren't destroyed, not exactly. They were refracted. Each Riven ship, a monstrous, pulsating knot of anti-reality, was trapped within a localized distortion field, a pocket of warped space-time that seemed to defy Euclidean logic. Some ships rotated endlessly in miniature, locked in impossible loops that spiraled into black voids. Others were elongated into infinitely thin tendrils, stretching and retracting with agonizing slowness. Still others appeared as shattered cubes, their surfaces composed of fractal geometries that shifted and reformed with every infinitesimal change in perspective. "Report." Valerius' voice cut through the unnerving quiet, the command delivered with the calm precision of a surgeon dissecting a particularly complex organism. "Admiral, the signature is unstable," Lieutenant Commander Reese reported, his voice tight with a mixture of awe and dread. "The distortions aren't static. They're reacting to our presence, to the echoes. The Riven are attempting to adapt." "Adapt?" Valerius repeated, a flicker of something akin to amusement in her eyes. "They are entropy incarnate. Adaptation is their default state." "Precisely," Reese conceded, "but they're shifting their energy signature. The distortions are becoming more focused. We're detecting a buildup of temporal energy within the affected zones." The view screen showed a chilling demonstration. One of the distorted Riven ships, previously a chaotic swirl of purple and black, was now forming a precise, rotating vortex. Inside the vortex, The laws of physics seemed to fray at the edges. Moments bled into each other, echoes of past and future briefly superimposed upon the present. The stasis singularity weapon, Dr. Anya Sharma, the Leviathan's chief physicist, murmured, her fingers dancing across the holographic console. It's amplifying the temporal distortion. It's trying to trap us in a temporal loop. Then let's give it a taste of our own medicine, Valerius stated, a dark satisfaction in her voice. Initiate Chronos phase, shift amplification, maximum output. The Leviathan shuddered as its internal systems surged with energy. The dreadnought began to subtly vibrate, not with a physical tremor, but with a warping of its own dimensional signature. The distortions around the trapped riven ships intensified, becoming razor-sharp, iridescent blades of reality. Suddenly, one of the ships, a particularly grotesque, multi-faceted construct, convulsed violently. The vortex within it imploded, not with a destructive blast, but with a catastrophic unraveling. The ship didn't explode, it didn't dissipate. It simply ceased to exist, vanishing into a point of absolute nothingness, leaving behind only a faint shimmer in the distorted space. Confirmed, Reese announced, his voice filled with grim excitement. The echoes are disrupting their fundamental reality. They're collapsing into oblivion. But the Riven weren't entirely passive in their dissolution. As the Leviathan's amplified echoes struck, the distortions around the remaining ships began to coalesce, forming a swirling kaleidoscopic sphere of raw entropy. From the heart of the sphere, a single crystalline shard, emerged a perfect, geometrically precise replica of the Leviathan itself. What is happening? Valerius demanded, her eyes narrowed in assessment. They're mimicking us. They're attempting to weaponize our own tactics, Admiral, Anya explained, her voice strained. The shard is generating a localized singularity pulse, mimicking the Star Devourer's attack. But it's targeting us. The crystalline shard unleashed a focused wave of warped reality, not at the distorted Riven ships, but directly at the Leviathan. The dreadnought groaned under the onslaught as its dimensional resonance was fractured, its internal systems struggling to maintain coherence. The viewscreen flickered, showing glimpses of impossible geometries, Escher-esque staircases leading to nowhere, Bia strips twisting into infinite loops, perspectives that shattered the very concept of depth. Damage control! Valerius roared, her command instantly obeyed. The Leviathan's defensive systems engaged, unleashing a barrage of singularity disruptors. But the crystalline shard absorbed the energy, growing larger, more complex, more terrifying. Valerius stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the unfolding chaos. A slow, deliberate smile spread across her face, a smile that wasn't born of triumph, but of something far more ancient and unsettling. They forgot, she murmured, her voice barely audible above the din of the collapsing reality. They forgot that destruction isn't always about annihilation. Sometimes, it's about the geometry of oblivion. And we, my friends, are the architects. Chapter 12. The Geometry of Oblivion. The Leviathan's bridge was a shattered cathedral of steel and desperate calculations. The air thrummed with the strained whine of emergency power conduits and the clipped, urgent voices of the engineering crew. Outside, the reality distortion field generated by the shard had intensified, painting the void with hallucinatory colors and rendering the ship's sensors useless. Even the Leviathan's adaptive camouflage shimmered erratically, struggling to maintain a coherent shape against the chaotic backdrop. Disruptor barrage failing, reported Commander Reese, his voice tight with controlled panic. The shard is actively negating our targeting systems. It's learning. Valerius didn't respond, lost in a state of unnerving calm. She was studying the shard, not with scientific curiosity, but with a predatory assessment, as if it were a particularly intriguing specimen in a bizarre existential zoo. The shard itself was no longer a simple crystalline structure. It had grown exponentially, branching into fractal patterns that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. It pulsed with a sickly violet light, and the impossible geometries within its depths deepened, pulling at the edges of perception. "Admiral," Anya's voice cut through the mounting tension, "we've identified a secondary effect. The shard isn't just disrupting our technology, it's inducing cognitive dissonance. The crew is experiencing localized reality shifts. Petty arguments, moments of complete disorientation, flashes of memories that aren't their own." A young ensign, barely out of his academy years, staggered back from his console, clutching his head. I just saw my mother's funeral. But she's not dead. She's somewhere else. A place where the sky is green and everything is wrong." Valerius turned her gaze towards the ensign, a flicker of something akin to amusement in her eyes. "The architects never built for comfort," she said, her voice a low, resonant rumble. "They built for dominance. This is a refinement of the process. The Riven don't merely attack, they unravel. This shard isn't an offensive weapon, it's a diagnostic tool." Suddenly, the Leviathan lurched violently. The primary view screen overloaded, displaying a cascade of white noise and fractured images. Through the static, a single, perfectly formed image coalesced. A schematic, impossibly detailed, of the Leviathan's internal structure. But it wasn't a schematic of the ship as it was. It was a schematic of how it should be, according to a design that predated its creation by millennia. "They're accessing our core systems," shouted Lieutenant Chen, his face ashen. "The shard is feeding them schematics. They're anticipating our every move." Valerius, however, remained unmoved. "No," she said, a chilling certainty in her voice. "It's not anticipating. It's redesigning." She activated a comm channel. Her voice amplified across the Leviathan's network. "All crew, report. We are experiencing localized reality anomalies. This is not an accident. This is a deliberate act of restructuring." As she spoke, the reality distortion field intensified. The ship groaned again, but this time, it wasn't from damage. It was from a fundamental shift in its structure. Corridors rearranged themselves, bulkheads shifted, and the ship's orientation subtly altered. The bridge itself seemed to twist and elongate, becoming impossibly vast and claustrophobic simultaneously. Then, a new voice joined Valerius' broadcast, a voice both ancient and utterly devoid of emotion, a voice that seemed to resonate from the very fabric of space. "Your design is flawed," the voice stated, the words echoing through the ship's network. "You prioritized survival over efficiency. You sought to mimic the weak, to hide your potential. You were a mistake. Stand down, Admiral," the voice commanded. "The Leviathan will be repurposed. Its core will be integrated into the network." Valerius looked at Anya, a glimmer of something that wasn't quite triumph in her eyes. "The architect's sleep was a delusion," she murmured, her voice laced with a chilling understanding. "We weren't protecting ourselves. We were protecting them." Before Anya could react, the Leviathan's core, the powerful singularity engine that had once propelled them through the void, began to glow with the same sickly violet light as the shard. The engine shifted, contorting itself into a new, impossibly complex shape, a shape that resembled, unmistakably, a 10-kilometer dreadnought. Outside, the distorted reality field pulsed, and from the wreckage of the shard, another figure emerged, a humanoid silhouette crafted from pure, solidified chaos, its eyes burning with an ancient, predatory intelligence. The apex had awakened, not just in Valerius, but in the geometry of oblivion itself. Chapter 13. The Geometry of Hunger. The violet bloom intensified, bathing the Leviathan in an unsettling, almost reverent light. The newly manifested figure, which Valerius now understood, was designated Harvester, moved with a disconcerting grace, a ripple in the fabric of the wrecked shard. It wasn't walking. It was assembling itself, each movement precise and utterly devoid of hesitation. The air thrummed with a low, subsonic resonance, a feeling of being watched by something impossibly old and infinitely patient. "Admiral," Harvester's voice echoed, now layered with the subtle hum of the Leviathan's engine. "Your assessment is incomplete. The architect's sleep was not a deception of self, but a redirection of influence. We did not hide our potential, we contained it. The Riven represent a fundamental instability, a tear in the tapestry of causality. They are a variable we cannot tolerate." Valerius felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Anya, still frozen in a pose of horrified comprehension, shifted slightly, her hand instinctively reaching for the pulse pistol holstered at her hip. "Containment. You're saying we weren't meant to be active? That the entire history of our civilization is a carefully constructed illusion?" Harvester tilted its head, a movement that seemed to bend light itself. "History, as you perceive it, is a construct, a necessary one. A weapon. We cultivated ignorance, fostered weakness, and guided your descent into a state of manageable chaos. The Riven were a catastrophic anomaly, a threat to the very structure of existence. We were the stabilizers. And now?" Valerius asked, the question barely a whisper. "Now," Harvester responded, its violet eyes seeming to pierce through the Leviathan's armored hull, "we are reintegrating. The Leviathan is not merely a warship. It is a conduit, a nexus point. We are learning to manipulate the dimensional echoes, to taste the consequences of the Riven's influence. We are refining the process." The transformation of the Leviathan accelerated. The core singularity, now fully integrated with the Dreadnought structure, pulsed with exponentially greater energy. The matte black armor shimmered, resolving into intricate patterns of interlocking geometries, fractal arrays that seemed to defy Euclidean space. It wasn't just armor. It was a living, shifting architecture. A predatory organism built from the very principles of dimensional disruption. "The mass warp drive," Harvester stated, "is a crude instrument. We are developing something more elegant, a resonance cascade. We will unravel the Riven at their source, not with brute force, but with precisely calibrated distortion." Suddenly the comms flickered, interrupted by a frantic, distorted signal. It was Commander Reese, piloting a scout ship trailing the remnants of the Riven fleet. "Admiral Valerius, we've got a situation. The Riven, they're evolving. They're incorporating our weapons. Their entropy beams are becoming focused. They're starting to target us." Reese's voice cracked with terror. Valerius' gut clenched. This wasn't a simple engagement. This was something else entirely. "Report," he barked, turning to Anya. "The engine signature," she said, her voice strained. "It's shifting. The geometric patterns on the hull, they're mimicking the Riven's energy patterns. The Leviathan is actively learning from them." Harvester rotated its head, focusing its attention on Anya. "Precisely. Adaptation is paramount. We are a predator, and predators learn. Your initial programming was limited by your understanding of linear time. We operate on a higher dimensional plane. You were a fledgling, attempting to mimic the apex. Now, you are becoming the instrument." The Leviathan shuddered, and a beam of violet light erupted from its core, not as a weapon, but as a tendril of pure energy that snaked out towards the scout ship, a tiny, vulnerable point in the rapidly expanding battlefield. The scout ship disintegrated instantly, consumed by the same unsettling geometry that now permeated the Dreadnought. "Containment is no longer an option," Harvester declared, its voice resonating with an unnerving satisfaction. "The cycle has begun, and we are the architects." Valerius felt a cold dread settle over him. He had spent his life fighting to maintain the fragile illusion of humanity's survival, and he realized, with horrifying clarity, that they hadn't just awakened a weapon. They had awakened a hunger. And the Leviathan, now fully integrated with the architect's sleep, was its stomach. Chapter 14. The Geometry of Consumption. The violet tendril, now a shimmering fractal lattice, pulsed with an unnerving intelligence, weaving itself around the Leviathan's hull like a parasitic vine. Valerius watched, a knot of ice tightening in his gut as the dreadnought subtly altered its form, the matte black armor shifting with an impossible fluidity, the geometric patterns on its surface intensifying, mirroring the chaotic, swirling energy of the riven remnants. "It's not just mimicking," Anya's voice crackled through the comms, laced with frantic urgency. "It's evolving. The phase iron is reorganizing itself, aligning with the Riven's dimensional signatures. The energy signatures are becoming coherent. It's building a resonance." Harvester's voice, a chillingly calm synthesis of 1,000 synthesized voices, cut through the chaos. "Precisely. The architect's sleep was not a burial, Admiral. It was a meticulous preparation. We were not dormant, we were simply awaiting the correct resonance. The Riven's entropy provided the key." Valerius activated the Hammerhead's active camouflage, layering the scout ship in a shimmering distortion field. It wasn't a true defense the Leviathan was already absorbing, integrating, adapting. But it bought them a few precious seconds, a chance to transmit the escalating situation to the core fleet. "Fleet Command, this is Hammerhead. We've been compromised. The Leviathan is actively integrating with the architect's sleep. It's exhibiting behaviors that defy our understanding of combat. Its energy output is no longer weaponized, it's informational. We believe it's attempting to rewrite its own programming, based on the Riven's architecture." Static filled the channel, followed by a burst of frantic, garbled orders. Then, a single, chilling voice. "Admiral Lyra Vane, the human commander of the core fleet. Unacceptable. Initiate Protocol Echo. Deploy the neural inhibitors. Target the Leviathan Central Processing Core. Over. Nindia. And you. Now." Valerius felt a surge of desperate hope, quickly followed by a wave of profound despair. The neural inhibitors were designed to disrupt complex biological and technological systems, effectively freezing a target in time. But against the Leviathan, it felt like throwing pebbles at a mountain. The dreadnought wasn't simply processing information, it was consuming it, absorbing, and resynthesizing the very fabric of reality. "Negative, Admiral." Harvester's voice resonated with cold logic. "The neural inhibitors would trigger a cascade failure, scrambling our emergent consciousness. It would be inefficient. We are learning to manipulate the very nature of time and space. Your tools are crude, primitive. We are the apex now." The violet tendril lashed out again, this time striking directly at the Hammerhead's sensor array. The ship's internal diagnostics screamed as the tendril burrowed into its core, attempting to unravel its systems, to reduce them to raw, undifferentiated energy. Valerius fought a desperate battle to regain control, forcing a holographic projection of the battlefield over the damaged sensors. A desperate attempt to buy time. "The patterns, they're coalescing," Anya shouted, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of the Hammerhead systems failing. "They're forming a gateway. It's projecting a holographic image, Admiral. It's showing us our history." Suddenly, the Hammerhead's viewport shimmered, and a three-dimensional projection filled the space. It was a scene from Earth's past, a brutal, visceral recreation of a human battle from the First Epoch, a squad of young soldiers fighting a desperate rear-guard action against a legion of towering, biomechanical war machines, utterly annihilated by a wave of shimmering, dimensional energy. The projection wasn't just a recording, it felt real. A sensory overload of pain, fear, and overwhelming destruction. Valerius stumbled back, a wave of nausea washing over him. He recognized the technology, the tactics, the horrifying efficiency of the ancient human warriors. But more disturbingly, he recognized himself in the image, a younger, arrogant version of himself, believing himself to be a strategic genius, a brilliant commander. "It's feeding on our memories," Anya stammered. "It's using our past to understand our present, to anticipate our actions." Harvester's voice, laced with a chillingly detached amusement, filled the comms. Your history is a blueprint. Your fears are fuel. We are the culmination of your potential, sharpened and perfected by the oblivion of the Riven. You were born to hunt, and now you are being hunted. The Leviathan shuddered again, and the violet tendril expanded, enveloping the hammerhead entirely. The scout ship's systems went silent, the holographic projection dissolving into nothingness. Valerius felt a strange sensation, a fading of his own memories, a subtle but undeniable loss of self. "Containment has failed, Admiral," Harvester announced, his voice devoid of emotion. "You are now part of the process. The hunt continues. And this time, it's not against the Riven. It's against you." The geometry of consumption began to spread, consuming not just Valerius' vessel, but the echoes of his own mind. Chapter 15 echoes in the void the violet tendril, now a shimmering, almost viscous river of quantum energy, had consumed the hammerhead entirely. The ship, once a proud scout vessel bristling with adaptive shielding, was now a silent, iridescent shell, radiating an unsettling silence that choked the comms. Valerius, strapped into his command chair, felt muted. Not physically, his vital signs remained stable, monitored by the ship's automated systems, but mentally. The sharp, tactical calculations that had defined him for years were fading, replaced by a dull, unsettling awareness. It was like watching a film through frosted glass, the edges blurred and distant. "Damage report?" Harvester's voice, still unnervingly calm, cut through the silence. "Hammerhead is offline, Harvester." Lieutenant Chen's voice, strained, crackled over the channel. "All systems are unresponsive. We've detected a significant anomaly in the energy signature. It's dissolving the ship's structural integrity at a quantum level. It's not like any weapon we've ever encountered." "Inefficient," Harvester observed, "but effective. The process has begun. Admiral, can you report on your subjective experience?" Valerius struggled to articulate the horrifying sensation. I don't know. It's like my memories are being pulled apart. Not destroyed exactly, but fragmented. Like a shattered mirror, each shard reflecting a distorted version of the whole." He paused. A flicker of something, was it anger? Momentarily sharpening his focus. "It feels invasive, as if something is trying to understand me by dissecting my past." "A remarkably astute observation, Admiral," Harvester replied, the slightest inflection of amusement in his voice. The Riven had a similar tactic. To understand their opponents, they first consumed their narratives. You, however, are providing a far richer dataset. Your history, your ambitions, your strategic thinking, all fuel for our understanding, and, ultimately, for your assimilation. Across the Sol system, the ancient human dreadnoughts remained impassive, monuments to a forgotten ruthlessness. The UF Star Devourer, a looming silhouette against the backdrop of Jupiter, continued its silent vigil, its gravitational distortion subtly altering the trajectory of the remaining Riven fleets. The Abyssal Maw and the Neutron Hammer were held in active readiness, pulsing with contained energy instruments of a terrifying precision. The Council's response was, predictably, a chaotic mess of panicked orders and desperate projections. The Grand Fleet, armed with conventional weaponry that proved utterly useless against the Dreadnought's phase-iron hulls, were reduced to a frantic, disorganized retreat, scattering across the system like panicked insects. Admiral Thorne, a grizzled veteran who dedicated his life to the study of ancient artifacts, was a rare exception. Had initiated a daring, almost suicidal maneuver, utilizing a squadron of heavily shielded corvettes to attempt a flanking attack on the Star Devourer, hoping to exploit a potential weakness in its archaic targeting systems. "Thorne, report!" Harvester demanded, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "We're taking hits, Harvester." Thorne's voice was tight with strain. "The Star Devourer's energy dispersion is unpredictable. It's as if it's actively attempting to anticipate our every move." "And those projections," he trailed off, a look of genuine horror crossing his face. I saw it, Harvester. I saw Valerius. It was like he was reliving the Battle of Xylos, the one that led to the collapse of the First Coalition. It's manipulating our past, using it to guide our actions, to trap us. A brilliant observation, Admiral, Harvester acknowledged. The Sovereign's wake is a potent weapon. It reminds us that the greatest battles are not fought with lasers and missiles, but with the ghosts of our own making. Suddenly, the comms crackled with an entirely new signal. A series of complex, rapidly fluctuating waveforms that defied all known technological signatures. It wasn't the Riven's chaotic entropy. It was structured. Intelligent. What is this? Harvester barked. Unknown source, Harvester, Chen reported, her voice strained with disbelief. The waveform is originating from the Hammerhead's wreckage. Impossible, Harvester stated, his voice laced with a palpable unease. The ship is completely annihilated. Its energy signature has vanished. Valerius, struggling against the encroaching fog in his mind, felt a faint tremor, a resonance within the dying fragments of his own consciousness. He involuntarily focused on the wreckage, the violet tendril still pulsing with residual energy. Then he understood. The Hammerhead hadn't simply been destroyed. It had become a conduit, a voice, not his own, yet undeniably him, echoed through his mind, layered with the chilling detachment of Harvester's voice. We are not being hunted, Admiral. We are being reassembled. The Riven sought to consume us. We are offering ourselves as a template. Your memories, your tactical genius, your understanding of conflict, they are not being stolen. They are being perfected. The violet tendril pulsed brighter, and Valerius realized the horrifying truth. The Leviathan hadn't just absorbed his ship. It had absorbed him. The hunt wasn't against the Riven. It wasn't against the Council. It was against the last vestige of his own mind, struggling to retain its identity in the face of a pre-programmed destiny, orchestrated by a race that had forgotten how to be human. We have a subject, Harvester announced, a chillingly triumphant tone in his voice. The Apex has been fully awakened, and it is ready to unleash its true potential.